Thank you, Scott. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our weekly webinar. Glad you're here tonight. Glad I'm here tonight. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about, just to recognize, we've done this before about COVID and some of the stressors that people are going through. We're about 6 months into this, believe it or not. And I think it's becoming clear that it's going to continue for quite a while, and that the phase that we're in is going to be quite extended. And so we're starting to get some really good data on what's been happening to people in the realm of addictions during this process. I just wanted to highlight a few of those trends, and then talk about maybe some tips that could help us all survive this with a little more of our mental health intact. First of all, since this started, um, just right off the bat, alcohol sales, when the shutdown sort of happened nationwide in March, alcohol sales went up 55% in about 2 weeks. And that's typical. When we look at spirits, which is the harder stuff, they actually increased by 75%. Um, Beer was 66%, and wine was 42%. It averaged out to 55%. So it's a huge amount of increase of drinking and problems going on with that. People reported, and this is staggering, 87% of people surveyed across several different studies noted that they were experiencing emotional stressors during this time. So it's nearly universal levels of emotional stress. The top emotions reported were worry or anxiety, not surprisingly, about 2/3, sadness about half, fear about half, and loneliness about 42%. All strong emotions that are triggering for all kinds of addictive behaviors and that we really have to pay attention to. But there's some other more disturbing trends in there. Overdoses. People are getting all these drugs, and they were not just accelerate, they're not just happening, they increase, but they're accelerating. Every single month we have information for, they're getting higher. So for example, they jumped 18% in March. These are overdoses with death. 18% in March, 29% in April, and 42% in May. Just staggering amounts of overdose deaths going up. So what's going on? We're seeing a lack of access to issues. We certainly, all of us in the recovery world, know that meetings for the large part dried up. So we're attending now by Zoom. We're attending online in any way we can. So, but there's been an overall lack of access. Not everybody has the equal access to technology and the ability to have the space where they can shut themselves off in a bedroom and close the door and check into a meeting. People are really crowded and having troubles with that. In addition, a number of people weren't able to access essential services. Many treatment centers closed. We at Seeking Integrity are open, but we have a very careful protocol for a 14-day self-quarantine before anybody comes to us. And so we're functioning with a lot of cautions and precautions, but a lot of places just have closed, or everybody goes into quarantine and they have to close. And even more so, a lot of people that are on medication-assisted therapy, a number of those sites closed as well. And so people are really struggling to find access to naloxone and some of the other, Suboxone, some of the other important drugs that they needed just to survive. In the emotions that people listed, loneliness was listed. And I think loneliness is a huge issue for people as we become isolated from each other, really. And the studies, every study verifies and validates that loneliness is a huge issue, and that we're going to talk. I have some tips at the end of this we're going to talk about. The other thing that's an important piece here for drug addiction is that supply chains were broken, and a lot of dealers kind of disappeared. They couldn't get their hands on drugs, and sort of the flow of drugs dried up or was disrupted. And so people turn to alternate sources, and that, they believe, is a significant part of some of these overdose deaths, because people are getting a lot of synthetics. People are buying something. I've read accounts of people who were not heroin users, but they were so desperate to find something, they bought heroin, turned out to be fentanyl. And so there's a lot of overdose deaths due to that disruption in the supply chain. So and plus we know that addicts in general tend to have lives that are more disrupted. So there's a higher degree of homelessness, there's a higher degree of transient populations, there's a lack of health care, some are incarcerated. So in general, I think addicts of all types are at a higher risk for being impacted by COVID and all the stressors that go with this time. So it's a really tough time for addiction. We know in the realm of sex addiction, all this time on computers is very triggering for porn addicts. We have people that are confined to home and they're being discovered as being sex addicts. People are starting to go through withdrawal, basically getting irritable and risky and all kinds of things because they can't access the people and act out in the way they've been trying to act out. So what do we do in all this? One thing, we need to stay connected, obviously. And the way we do that is online for the most part. And so I think it's really a matter of finding a balance between this online life. And Scott and I were just talking about a lot of us are spending hours online where we go hoarse and our eyes hurt and our butt hurts, to be frank. And we have issues. And frankly, for a lot of chemsex guys, Zoom had a whole other purpose before recovery. There was a lot of people, it's very triggering because Zoom was used for, I guess, sexual escapades. So we have to really find work out this love-hate relationship we have with Zoom and online life. And I think it's really important, but it's also really important to step away. And, when we are looking at a screen, it's basically kind of a hypnotic trance. Our mind, certain parts of our minds kind of turn off, other parts of our minds light up, and we're kind of in the zone here online. But if we do that day after day, it's really not a good thing. So I recommend getting up, getting outside. We really need to reconnect with the non-technological world. So go out, look at the sky, take a nature walk, take a kayak ride, do whatever you can to kind of connect with nature and do something outside. It's really, really important to kind of get a change of pace. Stay connected. One thing that they're finding, interestingly, is that if you have a regular standing appointment with someone, it's actually better than haphazard contact. So, I might have a weekly, coffee date with a friend online, or a weekly dinner date, or every other week. But if we do that routinely, it happens, first of all. And I know this from my own experience. I used to see a friend of mine, another therapist. We'd have coffee every week, and our lives got disrupted, and we keep meaning to, but we never get back to it. And when we had it on the calendar, it just kind of happened more effortlessly. So I think that regularity is important. Get off the computer, go outside. I mentioned, remember in terms of also the number of contacts we're having, I think it's quality over quantity. And so I think 1 or 2 great conversations a week online, I think, is really much more therapeutic than a whole bunch of them that are kind of superficial and maybe not as meaningful. So I think really kind of I've been very selective, I guess, in how I spend my time and who I spend it with to get kind of the most bang from my buck. This is going to sound a little bit maybe silly in the wake of huge death and a pandemic, but I think we really have to kind of try to be positive. And we've talked here before about negativity bias and that difference between the glass half empty and glass half full. But I think we really have to make an effort. At least I try to get out of bed with the intention every morning of trying to be as positive and present in my life as I can. And I think that's a choice we have to some extent, not always, but I think we really have to kind of check our attitude. There's a lot of, everybody's under stress. And so there's a lot of hostility. I think just right on the edge, people are ready to lash out and get angry. And we see that in outbursts of anger across the country. So I think just treating each other with respect, with kindness, taking care of ourselves, trying to get enough sleep, get enough non-computer time, getting enough time with our loved ones as best we can. The state of Massachusetts had this great public campaign, which I really liked. It was called Reach Out. And under Reach Out, it was ask, listen, encourage, and check in. And I love that because it's, ask how people are doing. I think, and I've made a point of trying to contact one person a day just for a brief check-in, just see how they're doing. And it's not, long drawn out conversations, but really just to check in. And people are delighted to get those kind of calls, just to know that somebody's thinking of them, that they're there. And it just means the world to people. And it makes me feel great too. So that's, I love that. Ask, listen, encourage, and check in. Just check in and see how people are doing. And then 2 more. One, I think, service. And that's in the principle of program in general. I think there's so much need out there. People are really suffering. I'm extremely privileged to have my life largely uninterrupted, except I'm confined to quarters here online. But I think, so many people are really struggling in so many ways right now with addiction, with emotional issues, with financial stressors. And so I think to be able to go on and do something as best we can, maybe there's a food bank to work at, or maybe there's delivering medications for somebody, or just reaching out and being supportive, I think is going to be huge right now. And finally, in terms of social media, I think one of the things we all do, and I do too, and we get bored, is turn to kind of social media. And I think we can start to really spend way too much time on that. And I heard a really great piece of advice saying basically, use social media as a facilitator, not a destination. And so use social media as a way to connect with people, to make arrangements to do something offline or something, a Zoom meeting, but not to spend out hours and hours on social media passing the time, but just to really get in, limit our time there, use it as a way to see what's going on, to catch up, and then maybe make arrangements with people to connect, and then get off and do it in a different way. There's probably lots more, but I think I think we've all become accustomed and kind of a little bit numb to the high levels of stress that we're going through. And it's about to get worse, I think, a little bit with school issues and the flu season and everything else. So we have to buckle up and take care of each other, and most of all, take care of ourselves so that we're available when people really need us. Thanks.
Thank you, David. There's a lot of great stuff in there. What about the TV in this time of nothing else to do? How do you feel about that? What are people doing with it?
Yeah, TV, I think I certainly take refuge sometimes in TV with Netflix or Amazon Prime or something. I think, remember, TV can really be an addictive behavior too. TV goes in the same category as overeating and a lot of alcohol and opioids. It's very kind of sedative-like, satiation kind of feelings, and it can be very addictive and dangerous. I think, we've all talked about the COVID weight gain most people have experienced. I think TV kind of goes with that. So I think we really have to be cautious about how much time we spend. Again, it's just another more screen time, which I think is not good. I know it's not good for our brains in too great quantities.
And, there's also, particularly with news watchers, the intensity. And we've talked about, sex addicts are intensity addicts and meth addicts are intensity addicts. And it seems like the news is pretty intense these days. Can people use it that way?
Yeah, that's a great, really great point, Scott. And absolutely. And I became aware of that myself when all this started going down, just really becoming obsessive about kind of watching the news, and I really felt that kind of compulsive need to check in. And I started getting kind of the brain fatigue. I started getting irritable. I started a little bit to lose myself. So I think one of the just good aspects for mental health things is to limit news time. And I have friends that do it in various formats. Some don't watch TV news at all. Some read a paper online. Some people watch for 30 minutes. But I tend to limit my time. And I think after a certain period at night, my cutoff is 10 o'clock. I really try not to watch any news because it starts to really disrupt sleep. And, if we're getting upset about stuff, we're getting involved, we're getting obsessive about something, that's the time we want to be telling our minds and bodies to kind of just chill and slow down a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've really cut back on news watching. I'll give myself a half an hour like every other day, and I try to watch a neutral station rather than one of the stations with the political slant. And it's just, and it still gets me really, really worked up. And I usually watch around 6 or 7, so like this time of day or a little after. So I have time to wind down, but I get so wound up from it, and even then I'll still struggle to get some sleep and to not be angry and annoyed. I saw somebody raise their hand electronically. We don't call on people here, but you can type a question into the Q&A or the chat feature, preferably the Q&A. So that's the way to ask us a question. I also wanted to point out that you talked about for addicts, it's been kind of hard to get the same kind of support we're used to, because we don't have a lot of privacy now. I mean, I teach work groups on Saturday and Sunday to newly recovering sex addicts, and half my guys are sitting in their car, with their phone, taking my course, because the wife and kids are in the house, and it's Saturday morning and the kids are up, and they can't talk honestly about what's going on unless they go sit in their car. That's the only private place they have right now.
Right.
And not just in terms of addiction support, but the lack of privacy for a lot of people in general would seem to be really wearing, at least to me. It would be for me. I live alone, so I don't have to deal with that.
No, totally. I think that lack of space, lack of privacy, lack of routine is really taxing on people. And I have the same thing. I've done client sessions with people in their cars because there's no private place to talk. And that happens quite often these days, I think.
Yeah. Pop questions into the Q&A about addiction recovery, COVID, anything you want to talk about, just type them into the Q&A. I did have one, we've got one in there, but I wanted to ask you one more question. I wake up and some days I'm great, and I wake up and some days I'm miserable, and there is literally nothing different from day to day for me. I mean, one day to the next for the last 3 months has been exactly the same, except, there's a different number on the calendar. But, some days I'm fine, I'm happy, I'm good, and other days I'm just cranky and miserable and mean. And are you seeing that a lot? Are you hearing that a lot? And I mean, you gave some tips on what to do, but what do you do when you wake up cranky in this day and age?
Yeah, I mean, I do hear it. Most of the time when people have talked to me about that, there's some external reason they can kind of put their finger on. Although I think, we'll process a lot of stuff in our sleep. I think we're all under stress. And I do think that it's possible that we wake up just bad in the morning, just really more stressed out than we might have been when we went to bed. And so I can totally see that happening. There's that kind of slogan and program about starting your day over. And usually if I can have a cup of coffee and, center myself, but some days are just kind of crappy these days, and it's hard. But I do hear that. I think that's common. I think that I'll tell you what I think it is our resilience, this kind of buffer or layer of kind of protective emotional, so kind of our emotional airbag. It's very thin. There's nothing there. There's no cushion for us to buffer us against these stressors when they flare up for whatever reason. So I think, again, it goes back to really taking care of ourselves as best we can in terms of being resilient in all those areas, including just basic self-care these days, I think is huge.
Yeah, and I like the analogy of, the cushion is kind of gone right now, because I have things that I mean, it's not like I never woke up in a bad mood before, but I have things to do to get out of it. If I'm feeling depressed or anxious, there are certain things that I do that work for me. I do my 11th step, I do a gratitude list, maybe I do some breathing, and I do some grounding, mindfulness that you talk about on the show often. And I'm finding that sometimes it's not enough for me. And I kind of have to come out and, just start answering emails and then go back into my room. I have a nice comfy chair in my room and do it all again. I've had to start my day over 3 or 4 times some days, just trying to get out of the funk.
Right. What helps me in that regard is exercise. Yeah, we have started walking earlier in the morning now because of just the heat. To be the same thing where you live, only worse. But maybe getting out and moving a little bit might help with that, exercise-wise.
That's a good idea. Okay.
I just wanted to mention, before we start the question, that you'd mentioned you're teaching a course online. I want to mention that I'll be teaching a course online too. Starting in October, we're doing a chemsex educational course. It's not therapy, it's not treatment, but it's a 4 90-minute sessions with me, interactive. We're limiting the amount of participants, and we're really doing a kind of a deep dive into what chemsex is all about in terms of the brain and arousal templates and all kinds of things like that. It should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, you can find that on our seekingintegrity.com website under workshops. There's a little drop-down menu. And I think we build yours as a lecture series, but you're going to be really interactive, yes?
It's interactive, yes.
Yeah, what I teach on Saturdays is much more of a class, but it's also very interactive. We like interactive, way more Okay. Hi, David. I was at your Tuesday in the Rooms meeting last night, and I started watching Crystal City, the documentary film that David co-produced and is featured in, based on your recommendation. I'm about halfway through. You are excellent in the film, by the way. Yes, you are. The young men profiled in the film seem to be putting themselves in dangerous situations. I'm wondering how frequently non-consensual sexual violence occurs and results in serious injury or even death. Scary stuff. Good question.
Yeah, well, thank you for the comment. I will say I'm really proud of that film, but it can be triggering for people. So I just want people to know that we presented a very hopeful and realistic picture, but it's realistic. And there's one guy and one character there. They're real people. It's a documentary, but one who really struggles with it. And there's some graphic scenes. So yeah, there's a lot of risk. I've had many friends in recovery talk about being in situations where they never thought they would be with guns pointed at them and things like that. They're also, because GHB is such a big part of the scene, gamma hydroxybutyrate, it's a very close cousin of rohypnol, the date rape drug. And we're seeing a whole lot of sexual violence occur with that. And I'm thinking in the gay community, a lot of bathhouse sexual assaults. People are slipped GHB or take it on purpose, and our sexual assault. There's been some really horrendous stories about people being assaulted and being live streamed. The only data I know on that was in the UK. The Terence Higgins Trust and Cambridge University did a very extensive documentary on that, and it's much more prevalent than you would think. I've had clients I've worked with over the years I've been working with them for several years, and only after that level of trust was established would they reveal that that had also happened to them. So I think there's a lot of, it occurs more than we know. People don't report it. They're ashamed of it. They're mortified by it. And so, yeah, I think that certainly does happen. And remember, people, when that midbrain reward circuitry is in charge, it only wants the hit. It doesn't care about really the ramifications or the consequences or the risk. In fact, in some cases, the risk is part of the thrill and part of the intensity. So it does happen. Unfortunately, there's not great data on that. Just anecdotal reports, there's some police reports, but a lot of this, as I mentioned, doesn't get reported. People don't want to talk about it. And so it can be a problem.
Yeah, in my 12-step group just here locally, I was just counting in my head, and I counted 6 guys that I know of who have told me that they were basically sexually assaulted in a chemsex situation, one way or another, and a couple of times quite violently with injuries. And none of the 6 reported it, and all of them, there was so much shame, but it was shame directed toward themselves for being there in the first place. A lot of the time,
Right.
It's like, I agreed to go to this party and to take the drugs, and I let somebody inject me, and I didn't ask what it was. And suddenly, there was a pile on top of me, and people were holding me down, and and there wasn't anything I could do about it. And they don't feel like they can report it because they put them. It's like they think the police are going to treat them the way that police used to treat some women, and probably sometimes still do, which is like, well, why are you wearing that short skirt? If you didn't want this kind of behavior, which is just awful. Because just because you go to a sex party doesn't mean you're planning to get raped, or you want to get raped, or get roofied and raped, or bad things do happen. And what was the guy in he was in LA, the activist, I think you did an article on him, who was joining guys and they were dying in his apartment repeatedly.
Right. Three men overdosed, two died. Ed Buck is his name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nobody did anything about it because, I think that by the third time somebody OD'd, the second time somebody died, I think the police finally stepped in and started investigating. But, it gets swept under the rug.
And he, like many of these guys, he's a predator, right? He was a sexual predator who was his particular fetish was, injecting people with drugs and really, I think, overdosing them purposefully. I don't know that, but it was a really terrible situation. But those people are out there, and
Okay, next topic, next question. Ask us questions, type them into the Q&A feature, please. My husband is a porn addict. I found out he also cross-dresses. I'm not handling this very well. Where can we get some advice on this subject? Well, you're in the right place right now. So yeah, a porn addict who also does some cross-dressing, and the wife isn't handling it very well. Understandable.
So yeah, first of all, your reaction is totally normal and appropriate. When you discover something like that, it's a shock. It's disturbing. It's people ask themselves, "What does this say about me? What is this?" And I would just want to kind of reassure you, it doesn't say much about you in the slightest. A lot of these things are about him. Of course, you're impacted by it. I don't mean to minimize that. It's a painful, it's a shocking thing, and this is a person you thought you knew, and now these elements are revealed. But in many cases, these, especially when there's something like cross-dressing involved, this is something that has probably been there a long time. That was there probably long before he met you. Whether he acted out on it or not, that impulse, I would bet, was there. And so that's something to be addressed. What I would recommend for you on just handling it is make sure you have some support. Make sure, I'd recommend a therapist, a CSAT, or a sex therapist who can help you kind of walk through your feelings and how you're reacting, and maybe help you get some understanding of it. I would draw a distinction between addiction and some of these orientations. So porn addiction is an addictive behavior with where people lose control, they escalate, they have consequences, and it's the standard stuff we see with addiction, except using pornography as opposed to alcohol or heroin. But really the same addictive process. Sometimes we see these other kinds of orientations or fetishes or kinks or things that are appealing that emerge that really aren't necessarily part of the addiction. The addiction helps facilitate them, but a lot of people hope that if they get their addiction under control, that particular interest will go away. And our experience and my experience is that that is not the case. Those things are pretty much there in what we call the arousal template. They're a permanent feature, or a semi-permanent feature at least. People may have the ability not to act on them, but I think the chances of it actually going away are probably pretty low. But that's not the same as the addictive behavior. And we do see sometimes people getting into addictive behavior to deal with the uncomfortable feelings they have about that particular sexual interest, or the consequences it's having on their loved ones, like you. And so there's a lot of guilt and shame and confusion when someone experiences those kinds of attractions. And so that's something to that I think you both need to talk about. I think you should both have your own therapist to deal with these things, and then you need to come together down the road to talk about how you're going to um, uh, heal the relationship or move on, or what you're going to do. Couples deal with this in many different ways. There's no one set fixed outcome. But so I think it's something that requires some conversation. But I think those kind of meaningful conversations really have to take place a little bit down the road, after there's more of a understanding of the addiction, once it's under control and some of the feelings have been expressed. Only then, I think, can you start to talk about, what does this mean for our marriage? What does this mean for you? What does this mean for me? And so on. It's a tough situation. I'm sorry you have to go through this, and it's very, very disturbing for people. It does happen with some regularity. It's not totally unusual, but it's painful nonetheless.
Yeah, one of the things about porn, well, two of the things about porn. Number one, there's a lot of intensity with porn, so it's it really gets the brain firing. And number two, it's revealing. People are exposed to things that they never really thought about before, and if it hits them right, they're like, "Ooh, that's interesting." So it's entirely possible that your husband had never cross-dressed before. It's also possible that he had, but that porn revealed that hidden element of his arousal template. David said we can add to the arousal template, or maybe you didn't say that, but but we really can't subtract. And really, I don't even think we add. What we do is we reveal,
we uncover, or yeah,
hidden, latent elements that we're not aware of. And porn is the king of doing that, by the way. So many men that I talk to, they're straight, they're married to a woman, they're happily married to a woman, but they've been looking at porn, and suddenly they're looking at trans porn and gay porn, and they're freaking out because they think that, well, I must be gay, and they're not. It's just, they've got a little bit of a bisexual element, and that element has been revealed by porn. And now they have to deal with that, and their spouse has to deal with that too. But like David said, it's perfectly reasonable to say, okay, I'm turned on by cross-dressing, but I'm not going to do it because it upsets my wife. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, at least for me. And I think a lot of guys, a lot of guys with some bisexual attraction who are married to a woman or married to a man, they choose to be faithful to the person that they love because they love that person.
right.
And, it stinks because you have to shut down part of your arousal template that maybe you've always known about, or maybe you just recently found out about. And it's usually, the intensity of porn makes it seem pretty fabulous. The fantasy of it seems pretty fabulous. And then you have to shut that down, which is not so much fun. But
One thing I'll say, just if this whole topic, it's probably new to you, why wouldn't it not be new? But cross-dressing, just for clarification, cross-dressing is something that's an erotic act, but it's usually, almost always occurs among heterosexual men. It's a heterosexual phenomenon. It's the appeal is dressing up in the clothes, but they're still attracted to women. Which seems kind of confusing on its face, but that's why it's really important, I think, for you to get information on what it is and what it's not, and sort of get some clarity. But most of all, get support for the feelings that must be coming up. I mean, I can only imagine the range of emotions. So help us out there. If you're new to this area, I would recommend CSAD, the certification, Certified Sex Addiction Therapist. They have training in some of these things that can help. They have better training than just your average therapist off the street would have, and can probably be more helpful to you in that process.
Yeah, and we could talk about arousal templates for about 3 hours straight. Probably they're kind of fascinating, and how they develop. Yeah, elements just we don't know how elements creep in, but they get there, and there we are. And we have to deal with it one way or the other once we become aware of it.
Right, and as Scott said, just by with porn, just by the sheer nature of the volume of images people are looking at, one after the other, things get uncovered. They stumble across things they never thought of, but and my experience talking to clients, they know it when they see it, right? It's suddenly, wow, they see something that they'd never seen before or even thought about, but it resonates somehow. And that's what I think Scott's meaning, talking about when we're uncovering something that was kind of there anyway, but it's just now being revealed.
Yeah, I'm a gay man. You could stick naked female images in front of me for a week straight. I am not going to be attracted to women. Sorry, ladies. It's just not going to happen because I'm a Kinsey 6. I'm like at the extreme. I'm 100% gay. If I was 90% gay or 80% gay, that would have some effect on me. But I'm not, so it won't. If it's not in the arousal template, at least hidden and latent, it's just not going to it's not going to go anywhere. And there's a million reasons why cross-dressing could be in your husband's arousal template somewhere back in the day, usually some childhood experience. David, I think this is from you. The arousal template is, most of the elements are formed somewhere between the age of 4 and 6.
There was a researcher at Johns Hopkins named John Money, who studied these in great detail, and basically, they were the elements were there long before a child was sexual, but that also made them very vulnerable to the effects of any kind of abuse or neglect, and that does skew how these things form, which I think explains some of the variation that's uncovered later in adult, like through these things that we never knew we thought were attracted to. Suddenly there it is, but they're often in place early. And as Scott mentioned, the tricky thing about arousal templates is that it's easy to absorb them, especially in a state of addiction, because there's a high dopamine, that it's high interest. When we're looking at porn, especially, we're in a hypnotic trance, so things go right into our brain, and so people are there. They're totally interested. They're engrossed in what's happening, and it's like the image gets mainlined right into our brain, and those things that have that high intensity kind of get locked into place, and they're very, very difficult, if not impossible, to remove. So that thing, we always talk to our clients about the dangers of those. If they're drug related, if you're in recovery, I have meth clients who they haven't had meth in a year, but when they have sex or masturbate, they go to a meth fantasy, and that's just keeping that all alive. We really have to let those things just go dormant, get overgrown, dusty, broken down, and find new things that are appealing for us.
Okay, we got a question that was posted in the chat feature here. It's another chemsex question, but an interesting twist. Do gay women, lesbians, have chemsex issues at the same frequency as men? What does chemsex in women look like? Does it involve pornography and the same degree of promiscuity or even violence? Great question.
Great question. There is, to a lesser degree, but it does look a little different. Men overall are kind of hardwired for visuals, and what's the statistics out with men and porn? 90%, something like that, as opposed to women. I mean, it's a huge amount of. There are women porn addicts, but I think the bulk tend to be men.
And the difference between men and women porn users, and yeah, the bulk are men, but there are more and more by the day female porn users. But male users tend to be into purely body parts and sex addicts, and we want to see the money shot. And women are looking for elements, or at least hints, of a relational connection and intimacy. Women are naturally wired to seek out that connection. Men are just naturally wired to be pigs, I guess.
Okay.
And there are some evolutionary reasons for that. A man is not going to get pregnant. A woman gets pregnant, and if she doesn't have, consider, 200 years ago, where, when you were pregnant and having a baby, you really needed somebody else to help you. You needed a partner. So women would bond. Whether the men did or not, the women would want to bond. The men, they didn't have the burden of child raising on, as a single parent that women would have. So we just evolutionarily didn't evolve that way. The world is very different today than it was, even 50 years ago in this respect. Plenty of single women have babies, and they are great with no man around or no other woman around. But we're still pretty hardwired in terms of what we get turned on by. Women get turned on by connection and a sense of connection along with the sexuality. Men, it's an endless parade of body parts.
Right. Now, beyond that, with gay women do often they co-occur with sexual behaviors and drugs, but they tend not to be the amphetamines as much, but more the sedative, the kind of satiation pull down toward alcohol, opioids, benzodiazepines, that kind of thing. There's a significant amount of chemsex among transgender women, male to female, a lot of amphetamines, a lot of methamphetamine, higher rates of injection drug use as well. And we're finding that's often around sex work. So yeah, depending on who you're talking about, and yeah, it definitely exists. The promiscuity, I think, probably is there. Well, the other thing I'll mention, we see with methamphetamine, is that heterosexual women are increasingly using methamphetamine. They've been using it for a while in pretty high numbers in the Midwest and rural areas of America. It's become a real problem. And as one of the consequences of COVID, I've been reading, is that as people can't get their drug of choice, they're getting anything that'll do. And so there's this kind of rapid switching right now between heroin and methamphetamine, and just really totally different kinds of drugs, that people are taking anything to get them to be able to check out from their feelings. And in terms of violence, yeah, I mean, the violence goes across the board, I think. High risk, there's a lot of more physical assault kinds of issues. But yeah, it does happen. I don't know about any kind of equivalent with the date rape kinds of stuff among women. That seems to be more of an extreme male kind of thing.
Yeah,
It may be out
you
there,
know,
frankly,
any
because
kind
these
of
are,
rape, any kind of rape is going to be much more of a power dynamic,
yeah.
which
Um,
sadly
and one
can
of the things we really struggle with when we're talking about these numbers and statistics is that these are really marginalized populations that are understudied and the research is underfunded. So we just don't know in many cases. A lot of it's anecdotal. And when there is research, usually it's a byproduct of some other research effort, then we start to learn more, sort of piecing together almost indirectly some of this information.
Yeah, and problems are much less likely to be reported by any kind of a minority community. There's just much less trust of reporting to authorities, and you know, gay men and gay women have been marginalized in many of the same ways that other minorities have been. So there's just much less reporting and just internalized shame and just live with it. And, so yeah, David's right. We really don't know. You know.
Right.
Ask us more questions. We've actually caught up. We didn't get very many today. We've got kind of a small group, which is actually fun. But send us some questions. But since we have a minute, David, talk a little bit about how, other than pornography, how other things enter our arousal template, or how anything enters the arousal template, either pre-sexual or when we're sexual later in life.
Right. So pornography is the most efficient way because it's images and you're sitting in front of a computer like one after the other. But arousal templates can enter in from can have elements added in all different ways. Experiences, a new experience, anything that is exciting and intense and gives us a little burst of dopamine. And remember, dopamine, the highest we can get a natural reward of dopamine is an orgasm, and that basically is our body's way of saying that was fun, let's do that again. And these elements that have high dopamine content, and when we get drugs involved, there can be up to 4 or 5, 6 times that amount of a natural reward. So it's a lot of drugs saying, wow, this is an important thing, let's do this again. And so if that occurs in any kind of sexual act, it can be as tolerance develops with addiction, we see people escalating their behaviors to seek that intensity. So they may get into riskier behaviors or more taboo behaviors or rougher behaviors and anything like that that kind of gets to be exciting and up the ante. What we do know when there's addiction going on, that people tend to get because of tolerance, get used to that behavior and need more. The brain kind of wants more to be stimulated and get excited. And so the behaviors naturally escalate, and that starts to incorporate more and more new things into the arousal template that we might not have tried. I've had clients using methamphetamine who were self-described just kind of vanilla, boring sex lives and perfectly happy with that. And because of addiction and the methamphetamine and the people they met and the experiences they had and the need for more excitement, they started getting introduced to all these other things. And those quickly were incorporated into the arousal template, and those kind of became the default little kitty. Those became the default go-to places. One thing we know with arousal templates too, that there's the more we go to these fantasies in our heads, once they get incorporated, it becomes easier and easier. There's a great little documentary 5-minute short that I show the clients that talks about when we first go to, it's a map of England, it's a British film. So they're going from London, which is their everyday ho-hum life, to Brighton, which is like the shiny place. And so that might be our addictive acting out in Brighton. And so the first time we go there, it takes time, it's the roads, we have to figure it out. And then the more we go there, it becomes kind of a super highway. And so we're training our brain to go to these few really hot arousal elements in our brain by going there so frequently. It's automatic. And that's the danger, is that they become not so much conscious, like, wow, that would be, exciting to go to this place in my mind, it almost happens automatically, and they become what we call deeply grooved in the brain, meaning it's hard not to go there, even if you're trying not to. And once we do it by habit, our brain steers us there like on autopilot. And so it's really tricky to break those habits. And it's very frustrating because in recovery, sex addicts and porn addicts and chemsex addicts don't have that shiny stuff anymore, and nothing seems arousing. And so they have to there's a period of adjustment when their brains have to kind of come back down to earth, and before things start to seem exciting again. It does happen. And I know a lot of clients can get really hopeless about it. It's never going to happen, but it does. But it takes time, and it takes avoiding, like that guy I mentioned who was clean from meth but kept going to meth fantasies. He's just delaying the process by doing that. Other ways, arousal template, trauma. As kids, we talked about the arousal templates being in place early on. Trauma has an impact. John Money, who studied these at Hopkins, talked about trauma basically adulterating the arousal template and kind of hijacking it. And how to do that, even if it's non-sexual stuff, through issues of vulnerability and trust, and some of those issues that start to reflect themselves maybe in how we attach to people or create relationships as adults. And that may be underlying, a lot of the bad choices we make. And if we've had repeatedly bad relationships, that can be a problem with who we're looking for and how we're seeking that out and how we express ourselves. And so it really starts to spell out and unfold in all these different ways in our lives. That's quite dramatic, actually.
Yeah, and any type of trauma, I think, can be sexualized by a child subconsciously. If your mom spanks you a lot with her high-heeled shoe and tells you that means she loves you, there's a good chance that's going to enter your arousal template in some way. Maybe high heels are going to be a turn on, or maybe you're going to like spankings or dominatrixes, or you're going to equate that with feeling wanted and loved, and it's just anything can get in. Something that's totally not sexual can become sexualized.
Right. That's the definition of a paraphilia. It's a non-human attraction. We've expanded to more general terms, but that's exactly what it is. It can also happen in something called trauma bonding, where we start to find appeal in partners who, based on a trauma we've had with usually a caregiver, parent, and it could be neglect, it could be abuse, and that somehow gets converted into an attraction. Often some therapists would say as a way to resolve it or heal it as an adult, but those things do impact who we end up being attracted to in the long run. It's quite fascinating. And there's huge gaps in our knowledge. We just don't know exactly how this all works. But in the last 10 or 20 years, we've gained tremendous amounts of information. And I think, hopefully, I'm excited to see what happens in the next 10. I think we'll get even more information.
Okay, so thank you, David. This next question is from a betrayed partner who wants to know what kind of sex life is possible with a sex addict in recovery. Will I always worry that anything besides just basic vanilla sex will trigger my partner? Great question.
Yeah, so, I really I consider myself sex positive, which means that I believe, sex is a good thing, a healthy thing, something to be celebrated. It's a vital part of our lives. And that means whatever it means. It doesn't have to be vanilla and boring. I think, in fact, I encourage clients or individuals to kind of explore and have fun. And I mean, sex is awkward and confusing sometimes, but it's also fun, and it should be enjoyable. We want that dopamine to flow. Dopamine's not the enemy here. We want to keep it going, but in healthy ways. And so, I would tell a couple to, first of all, do the healing, because any couple that has had an addiction, a sex addiction, will have a lot of issues of trust and vulnerability, and a lot of um, harm and wounding to both parties, especially the betrayed partner. And so I think it's important to kind of make sure that healing happens with the proper disclosure and the proper healing and the recognizing any trauma and doing work on that and kind of doing all that process of healing. But I think there's also through healthy communication, I think it's great to explore. And um, I don't think, first of all, it's your responsibility as a partner to worry about whether you're triggering your addict or not. I mean, that the addict is really responsible for their behavior. And triggers occur out there, yes, and so we have to work with how to diffuse that trigger. How can we manage it? But I think it's not up to us to demand that the world treats us carefully. And so, I think when we put that on a partner, it really kind of is a little bit stifling in terms of their expression and their needs. And if I ask for my needs to be met, am I going to be triggered? You can't be torturing yourself with those kind of thoughts. There is a great exercise I mention probably every week by Masters and Johnson called Sensate Focus, which is a wonderful way for couples to kind of reignite and explore sensual and sexual arousal. And it's a great way to kind of reconnect. It's a communication exercise. If you just Google it, there's a ton of information out there. Sensate Focus by Masters and Johnson. But I think I would not assume that your life is going to be confined to a very basic kind of uninteresting sex. The whole point of recovery is to heal and really have great sex in a healthy way. So yeah, I would and to me, the key is each of you doing your work to heal, and then really healthy communication, and you'll be surprised what you can discover.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people that I'm talking to ask this question: are you connected? You can be as kinky as you want to be, if the two of you, or the three of you, or the seven of you feel emotionally connected. If I'm in tune with you and you're in tune with me, great. And that's why the Sensate Focus exercise is so great. It walks you through a bunch of stuff while kind of forcing you to stay connected and in tune with each other. And that's what makes sex fun is being connected, I think.
Right. And there's a follow-up here that talks, or it's part of the question, lingerie, sending sexy or regular photos, etc. I think that's the kind of thing that, again, communication, talk about it. The one thing there I would say, just be careful of the sexting, because that can be very triggering for other kinds of ways. But with communication, maybe that's not triggering, and maybe that's hot. So good for you. So I think it's just a matter of communication.
And triggering your partner towards sexual arousal is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. You want your partner to be triggered towards sexual arousal. Let's say if you put on some lingerie, great. Just make sure that he acknowledges that it's you inside the lingerie instead of just some body parts. That's
great point, Scott.
Yeah. Probably time for one more quick one here. Can prescription drugs like Xanax, Lexapro, Wellbutrin, Klonopin, etc., and or Clopin, I don't know if that's different than Klonopin, in any combination contribute to sexual intensity for an addict with regards to orgasms?
Yeah, depending on the drug, those probably not so much. Those are benzodiazepines and antidepressants. So I think they would do the antidepressants, Lexapro and Wellbutrin, when they're prescribed by a doctor are really valuable and helpful with moods. The others are benzodiazepines, which I really consider a very dangerous class of drugs, highly addictive, really complicated withdrawal. So I'd really kind of stay away from those, but they're not going to add intensity. If anything, they're going to kind of do the opposite. A lot of people use those benzodiazepines as a way to kind of handle the shame and remorse or the healing of the I've had chemsex clients who have all methamphetamine and all kinds of stimulation, and then they use those drugs to kind of come down, but they're not going to add the intensity per se.
Yeah, different drugs have different impacts. You've written a series of blogs that actually are on sex and relationship healing right now. So if you want more about the impact of various drugs, everything from alcohol and nicotine through, heroin and meth, there's a series of blogs by David on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. It kind of breaks them down by category because they all have different impacts and different interplay with sexual behaviors. So I see we have one more question. It's in our chat feature. I'm going to go ahead and ask it, and we'll answer very quickly.
Okay.
As two middle-aged gay men, how would you compare today's psychosocial climate to when you both came out? I was 62, or I am 62, and when I grew up, homosexuality was considered a sinful illness to be hidden or prayed away. My sense is there is more acceptance and tolerance now, but young gay men still seem to struggle. How are the struggles different from what you went through?
Yeah, so just, wow. How do I do that in 1 minute?
That's
Yes, I think it's
hour-long discussion.
the social context is vastly improved, of course, but I think there's still a huge challenges for people. There's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of discrimination, there's messages from the church and the government and families. I just was dealing with parents of a young gay man yesterday who said we love him, but he can't come home if he's going to bring his boyfriend. Just that, so that stuff still occurs. So I think, yeah, it's different, but it's not a panacea. And I think it's still really, people struggle, and there's a lot of internalized homophobia still, and a lot of drug abuse to numb the pain of that whole situation.
Yeah, if the people who are supposed to love you exactly as you are, your life is going to be a lot easier. If they don't, it's going to be a lot harder. Then that's the same today as it was, 50 years ago. But parents are more inclined to accept and love today, I would say. More parents are more inclined to accept and love than in the past.
Yeah, I think for sure. Yeah.
So it's better, but it ain't great.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, David. This was a nice session. We had a smaller group today, but great questions. So
really
thank you,
wonderful
everybody, for being
questions.
here. And we'll be back next week. We'll see you then.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Good night, everybody.